It's okay, I promise. Are we? Oh, hello, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Catechesis. I'm Father Joe Krupp, and you are not. And today is Wednesday, June 14th, the year of our Lord, 2023. And I was just telling Callie, the woman who works here with me, I was just telling Carrie, I forgot to make coffee. That's a pretty big problem.
Should I run up and make
Oh, no. Thank you, sis. I'm good. I promise. I'll probably die and join the ranks of the many Christian martyrs all over the world. So I'm very excited to be here with you today, the day after my 25th anniversary. And I'm geeked out for this Sunday. Freaked out, but geeked out. No one believes me about this, right? The statement I'm going to make. And I'm dead serious. And I'm at peace with the fact that no one will ever believe me. I hate being the center of attention. I hate this. And I hate standing there and seeing 9,000 people I love and not talking to all of them. So that's the only struggle. Otherwise, tacos, Greek food, and hot dogs. Yes, please. And that's all this Sunday here at Holy Family in Grand Blanc and St. Mark and Goodrich. So thank you, by the way. It seems to me we've been getting more beautiful letters than usual. Now, there was that one, and I said a prayer for her, and I'm trying to remember her name. Isn't this embarrassing? Anyway, you know who you are. You're here in Grand Blanc, and you wrote me a stinking beautiful message over Facebook.
I think it's Jillian.
Thank you. All of you, thank you. I can't believe this helps. Seriously. I can't believe that this is helping people, this podcast. And I don't say that in a bad way. I say that in a joyful way. I love doing this. I don't know what's wrong with you people that you love listening to it. But maybe we're all nuts. And if so, sign me up for more crazy. Speaking of is the Martyrs cam working today? Let's check in on the Martyrs cam. Yep. Okay, so for those of you who are viewing at home, as you can see, he is out of control. Ready to spring into action. But today I should actually get started because we're probably going to do this again tomorrow. I can't imagine we'll finish today. But before we get into it, huge prayers and hugs to Edmundo's mom, Giannina. Huge prayers to Father Dave Howell, superstar action figure, collar sold separately. Shout out to my thugs. New York, who's not in New York, and I can't remember where you are, New York, but North Carolina doesn't work. North Carolina, it just doesn't work. And of course, a shout out to Celtic Cove Catholic Bookstore in Oxford, Michigan, and they all talk like that there. And Michigan Church Supply Mount Morris. Oh, and you know what else I want to point out? I'm putting on my DeBucks hat. So for those of you not in Michigan, we've had a drought. This has been the least rain in spring I ever remember. And I don't know if it's messing with their business, but I think we should all pray for them. So for those of you who don't know, they're a sod farm that supplied us with all the beautiful grass around our church. People could not believe the grass. And I, of course, claimed complete responsibility. I was like, yeah, that was me. But it's like this beautiful grass. And, of course, this weather is just making it dormant, is what I learned. It's not killing it. It's making it go dormant like a volcano. But we got a little bit of rain yesterday, and it's starting to make a comeback. So we do need to pray for rain. Our farmers are in trouble. Make no mistake. But anyway, so whenever I see that beautiful grass, I'm like, $2. So if you're anywhere near them, you should go to them if you need business. If you need grass, not, but real grass. Not the kind you smoke. The kind you water.
You just had to say.
I had to, because I was like, I could see them. And, this is such a lovely family, but people showing up, dude, I want to spark up a doobie and get laced. And they're like, I'm sorry, it's not that kind of grass. So anyway.
She's in Virginia.
Virginia! No, it doesn't work.
All right? And
Sorry.
You're being asked for an explanation of your T-shirt.
What T-shirt am I wearing today? Oh, Claymore mines, right? Everyone knows that. No? Oh, did you know it?
Not the girls.
Oh, okay. So hold on. Let me get a drink. So when they made Claymore mines, I don't know if you've ever seen one. Look it up on Google and know that the moment you type Claymore mines into Google, the NSA is gathering your address. Let's just get that out there. But if you've ever seen a Claymore mine, they're extremely effective tools of warfare, right? It's a box with 4 legs, kind of a rhombus, really. Or I don't know what you call that shape. I think it's called a rhombus. And it has these little lasers that come out. And if you trip the lasers, it blows up and throws stainless steel ball bearings at your body. Okay? So the problem they found when they first started making them is, and this is actually awful and hilarious, nobody could tell what the front was. So when you go get a Claymore mine and you're in the military, truly on the front it says, front toward enemy. Wait, were you in the Army during this? Did you guys have Claymores? No. Yeah, I think this is like Vietnam era and past.
Did you ever tell them about the change in the society in Korea?
Oh, God. Dad wants me to tell a horrible joke right now, and I can't. Because I'm sure YouTube has just been throwing people's accounts out left and right. Did you read about this? They did a massive purge of any account that said, well,
You can't say it.
I can't say it, that did not bend the knee to transgender ideology. There we go. I can say that.
All right.
We might have to, what I got to figure out, and if you guys can help, I'm dead serious. So I'm still locked out of Twitter. If we can somehow, I've appealed, I've done everything. What I'm learning is Twitter does not do that. Have you heard about this? And more people are broadcasting off of Twitter, which doesn't restrict free speech.
Yeah.
Right? I can't believe we're saying those words. You guys, this was unfathomable 10 years ago.
Right.
It is impossible that 10 years ago you would not be allowed to say putting on a dress and wearing a wig and makeup does not make you a woman. It doesn't make you less of a woman or less of a human, right? You're a child of God. I'll die for your right to dress like that and to look like that. I'm not going to call you a woman. You're a dude who's dressed like a woman, which again, that's your business. I'm all in. But who would have thought? How did this happen? Okay, I got to stop thinking about it. So, speaking of totalitarian oppression, we're going to look at China today. So we looked at the Catholic Church in the Middle East, and we see basically the end of Christianity there in your lifetime, easily, if you're under 70, right? Then we looked at Nigeria and found that more Christians are being killed there now than all over the world combined. Now, there's an asterisk with that, and it's China. Why? We don't know how many people are being killed in China. We have no idea. This is the whole blessing of living in a totalitarian regime. And so we're going to take a look at a real quick primer, maybe is the word, on the history of Catholicism in China. I'll be very quick, don't worry. And then we'll look at the situation today, which for Catholics is extreme and it's awful. Okay? So with that in mind, let's dive in. I am going to forego the attempt to pronounce the names of the Portuguese Jesuits and the Chinese leaders. And instead, I'll just say names like Billy. Because, yeah. Okay. So what we're going to start with, and this is, for those of you who don't know, again, Asian history is kind of my thing. Okay. That's probably the history I'm most knowledgeable about, I think. I don't know. But this might surprise you that Christianity's first appearance in China is in 635 AD, which you might think, well, that's a long time after Jesus. The Romans didn't know China existed. You got to remember that. They knew there was some huge place over there that every once in a while they got stuff from, and there are records of Romans meeting with people that we believe have been Asian. But it was just, you got to remember, between the Roman Empire and what we call China now, were a lot of places that hated Rome and that Rome hated, and that were capable of going toe-to-toe with Rome, right? The place we call Iran now, the Persians, the Seleucids, not the Seleucids. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's not only that they were 1 billion miles away in a day when your only way of getting somewhere was walking, it's that there was a lot of enemies between here and there, as it were. So in 635, what we find is that a Syrian missionary got all the way to China. Now, he was a Nestorian Christian, and Nestorian Christians basically were the only Christian presence in Asia forever, right? The Mongolians, or the Mongols that were Christian were, I think, all Nestorian. If there were Mongols that weren't Nestorian, I don't know who they were. But like Genghis Khan, his mom was a Nestorian Christian. Anyway, there was a monument erected in the year 781 that's a testament to the Syrian missionary whose name, I'm not even going to try, Aloppen. I think that's pronounced Chuck. And he was the first Christian missionary we know of to arrive in China. That's in 635 AD. Okay, and he was a Nestorian Christian. So what we know is these Eastern monks were later kind of the competition for the Roman Catholics. Okay, but wasn't that big of a competition because there wasn't a ton of either. Does this make sense? All right. Now we jump, get this, all the way to 1294 AD. And the first Catholic church was established in China by an Italian whose name was Giovanni, and then 87,000 letters. He established China's first Catholic church and was their first Catholic bishop. And he built a cathedral in 1299 in the city that's now called Beijing. Okay, so that was in the year 1295. In 1368, the Yuan dynasty collapsed, and Catholicism was forbidden in China. The Catholic Church basically then disappeared there for almost 200 years. Now, were there still Catholics there? Were there still Catholic things going on? We think so. We just don't know. It's hard for us to imagine. But, really look at Japan, okay? Japan effectively sealed herself out from the outside world until the 17th century. Think about that. You could do that back then. How could you do it? Force of arms and violent suppression. And you think, well, why didn't people rebel? Because everybody was used to that form of government. There really weren't a lot of republics floating around at this point. And the republics that existed were not really that strong. There was always the threat of monarchy, if you'll excuse the phrase. How we doing? So what happened in those 200 and some years? It was like 220 years. We don't know. What we do know is that 200 years later, so 1582, it's like 220 years later, Matthew Ricci, a Jesuit, back when they were Catholic, that's a joke, inaugurated the first Jesuit mission. And this was at the end of the Ming Dynasty. He got into China and made a beautiful mess of things. He wrote a lot of books in Chinese, the most famous of which is called, quote, The True Meaning of the Lord of Heaven. He published that in 1603. Okay. Oh, and you know what? I'm really embarrassed about this. I gotta look. I did not type the name on this document of the guy who wrote this glorious timeline. Give me a second, okay? Anthony Clark. Okay, Anthony Clark is a Catholic who lived in China and probably still lives there. I'm not sure. But he made this awesome timeline. I've added some things and I've taken away some things, but this excuse me for not pointing that out earlier. I think that's important to do. So that was in 1582. When you get to 1685, China got its first priest, a guy named Father Gregory, name I won't try to pronounce. The first priest that was made a bishop. It was a Chinese citizen who was consecrated a bishop in 1685. Now, get this. It wasn't until 1926 that there was another Chinese priest who was made a bishop. Why? Honestly, at core, there's some racism at work here. And I don't say that lightly. The church was always suspicious of indigenous bishops, for lack of a better phrase. So if you even look in the U.S., we used to get bishops from Europe, not from our ranks. Why? Well, they didn't trust us. Still don't. And some of that was Eurocentrism, which, again, if you know your history of China, I'm not going to get into it because I could go on and on and on and on. But at this point in history, most of Europe looked at China with great contempt. This backwards, awful place. And you might be thinking, but China was way ahead of Europe in so many ways. You're absolutely right. But that kind of Eurocentrism forbade them from seeing it. Okay? So that's important to keep in mind. This was a period of history where racism wasn't something people thought about. It was just something they were in many ways. Right? How did that sound? I don't want to sound super judgy. I hate when we take today's morals and apply them to people 400 years ago. That's totally unfair. What we knew and what people experienced in the world was so radically different. It really was. And of course, it's always a weird thing when a country that has 3,000 abortions a day judges anybody. You know, it is. It's really weird. But so everything was kind of moving along. We're walking out of 1685. We've got a Catholic Chinese man who was made a bishop. But then in 1692, the Emperor of China published an edict that expressed toleration of Christianity in China. Now, we've done weird things with the word tolerate in our culture, but it's actually a lovely word. Tolerate doesn't mean anything dark. It means something lovely. It means I don't agree with you, and that's okay. Yeah, which this republic used to thrive on. And it's a really important word. St. John Paul II in the 1980s said that tolerance will be one of the primary virtues necessary for Catholics and multicultural societies. Right? Basically, leave people alone. Yeah, let them be. We're just not good at that. Anyway, here's what the edict stated. Quote, all temples dedicated to the Lord in heaven, in whatever place they may be found, ought to be preserved. And it may be permitted to all who wish to worship their God to enter these temples, offer him incense, and perform the ceremonies practiced according to the ancient custom of Christians. Therefore, let no one henceforth offer them any opposition. This was in 1692, and it was a big deal. This is a feudal system. You've got a king or an emperor, whatever word you want to use, they preferred emperor, who said, you know what, Christians, you're welcome here. You can do fine here. You can worship, and everyone is going to leave you alone. That was in 1692. That's the good news. Bad news, he changed his mind. In 1706, he retracted his support of Catholicism. Why? Because the Catholics were ripping each other to pieces and trying to do traditional traditional Chinese rites, right? So you had this beginning of what's going to be a very long cultural fight that goes all the way to today. China's leaders wanted good Chinese citizens more than they wanted good Catholic Chinese citizens. Does that make sense? They wanted you to be Chinese first and Catholic second. And when China and Catholicism bumped into each other, China wins. When the church said, not really, then the emperor expelled all Roman Catholic missionaries from China. What this comes down to is much like what we talked about when we talked about the Jews bumping into the Greeks and the Greeks bumping into the Jews. Everything's fine for a bit. Because when you have one culture that says, well, there's a bunch of gods, worship however you want. And you have another culture that says there's one God and we're going to worship it. At first, your temptation might be to think, well, the guys with one God are going to be jerks. But no, it always is the other guys. Why? Because eventually they say to the Catholics, well, worship our gods too. What's the big deal? And the Catholics are like, sorry, chief, we don't think those are gods. Then those who think they are gods get very indignant. Does this make sense? Right? This is part of, and I think I wrote about this the other day, the tyranny of relativism. That relativism is this idea of, oh, you have your truth, I have mine. And it always starts off so wonderful because we can just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. The trouble is when within that group is a group of people who says, hey, you do you, but I can't do your rituals because I don't believe they're true. And nobody wants to hear that. It is always the relativists who kill 1 million people. It's just how it works out, right? So that was until 1723 that emperor expelled Christians. Now, if you know your Chinese history, you know the Boxer Rebellion. And in 1898 till 1900 is when the Boxer Rebellion was at its peak. And during that time, 30,000 Christians were massacred. What was it? It's a very long, complicated thing. The shortest way to look at it is that the Boxer Uprising was an effort by Chinese nationalists to purge China of foreign influence. And what was a perfect example of foreign influence? Christianity. Right? They saw Christians as a foreign influence that needed to be purged. Now, to be clear, it's not, again, Eurocentrism was a problem here. You had European bishops dancing about China, looking down their nose at these scum, these lower-than-life Chinese. Okay? And so it's not that Christians were innocent victims and the Chinese nationalists were horrible people. It was a bit of both. Now, whatever behavior the Christians did obviously should not have resulted in massacre. But I don't want you to think it's like, oh, these Christians were just all doing wonderful things and then these strange people popped up and killed them. This was all part of a growing phenomena of Europeans coming into China, taking their stuff and leaving and looking down their nose at these people. Right? Part of this then was that Christians got slaughtered. And you think 30,000's a lot. Think about how many people were in China at the time. It's a lot, right? 30,000 is an obscene amount. It's basically like adding a zero now, okay? Now, by 1926, you get to this phenomena where China's missionary bishops would not agree to consecrate Chinese people as bishops. So Pope Pius XI invited 6 Chinese priests to Rome, and he made them bishops, right? And he did it at St. Pete's. This was smoking, right? You had all these European bishops in China who weren't going to allow those stupid Chinese people to be bishops. The Pope was like, I will. And he brought 6 priests over, and they came back home bishops. Additional vicariates were created by the Pope, well, his offices, in China, and Chinese bishops and Chinese clergy began to administer them. It's pretty good stuff, right? Way to go, Pope Pius XI. Now we get to 1949. Mao Zedong announced the founding of the People's Republic of China. That's October 1st, 1949. Before a massive group of people in Tiananmen Square. there were about 3 million Chinese Catholics at this point and about 1 million Protestants, all whom were forced to accept this new regime based on atheistic communism. Okay? Catholicism and Christianity are now illegal. From 1950 until 1955, all foreign missionaries and non-Chinese Christians are exiled or executed from China, mostly exiled. Roman Catholic priests and nuns were forced to leave China or were arrested as, quote, ideological saboteurs. Okay. 138 Chinese Protestant leaders then issued a document, this was in 1954, called the Christian Manifesto. And it created, quote, it created the three self-patriotic movement. What were the three selves? Self-governance, self-support, self-propagation. Basically what they were trying to do, and this is bold, is reconcile Christianity with Mao Zedong and the Communist Party. Now, you're going to be shocked, but that didn't work. Communism allows for one master. That's it. In 1955, the Bishop of Shanghai was arrested, along with a number of other bishops and more than 1,000 Catholics. They were imprisoned for long terms. For example, Bishop Gong was imprisoned for 30 years because they would not say Mao Zedong is above the Pope when it came to their religion. Okay? The Chinese Communist Party began targeting Christian missionaries and monasteries during this time. And even as Protestants began fleeing the country, the Catholic Church told 3,000 Catholic missionaries to stay in China. Stay and serve and die. And they did. Even after the war, they stayed. So initially, Catholics were allowed to operate, but they were under significant scrutiny, and the slightest deviation from the rules got you imprisoned or executed. Okay. All foreign missionaries had to register with the government, and Chinese authorities regularly interrogated all Catholics, and they investigated their hospitals and schools. They basically decided we're going to tax churches to death, and it worked. They jacked up taxes for churches so high that churches couldn't stay open, and they began closing en masse. The Chinese government began mass arrests of all foreign missionaries once the Korean War started. And again, the Catholic Apostolic Nuncio to China begged the Catholics, missionaries there, stay and resist. Now, they don't mean resist like pick up guns and fight. Stay and teach people the faith. At this, the Apostolic Nuncio to China was arrested and expelled, claiming they were trying to assassinate Mao Zedong. Okay, Mao also then ordered the arrest and execution of all members of the Legion of Mary. By the summer of 1953, the Catholic Church in China was completely and totally suppressed. Enough bishops and priests were executed and killed, enough missionaries were executed and killed or exiled, that the church, any sense of it, was gone. Now, what we found out later was that there was an underground church that was kind of thriving. What do I mean kind of thriving? Meaning people were joining. The number was growing, but the number of them getting arrested and executed was also growing. Okay? How we doing so far, Kara? Is everybody keeping up? Is this boring?
Yes, no.
Okay. So when you get to 1966, and again, if you know your Chinese history, dear God, The Cultural Revolution. Yeah, the Cultural Revolution. This is when China began the process of rounding up all its intellectuals and torturing them to death. I read a book, 1991, I think, called Family by Pa Chen, which is not a Christian book, but it's a walk through the Cultural Revolution. There is really no clear sense of how deep the horror ran. What we know is that the failure of communism, which is always total, right, had to be explained away. The people dying of hunger in a country with that much farmland had to be explained away somehow, and Mao Zedong, of course, blamed saboteurs and Christians and intellectuals. And just like here, right, where you have a ton of college professors advocating for some form of communism, same thing happened in China. And the same thing happened there that always happens. Those same guys were then rounded up and executed. Right? The system they hungered for is the system that killed them. This Cultural Revolution unleashed hell on not just society, but especially churches and universities. Catholic priests, nuns, faithful, and churches were all attacked by communist youth called the Red Guards. Churches were gutted of all religious symbolism, seized by the government, and then confiscated for secular uses. It is not clear how many Catholics were imprisoned, executed, or sent to labor camps, but the number is believed to be in close to 100,000. And you think, how many is that? That's almost all of them at that point. This was extremely effective. The government had infiltrated churches and effectively, like when you read about what Philip did to the Templars, this is what they did to the Christians in this time. So that was 1966 to 1976. And then again, we get another gap where we just don't have much information. In 1981, Chinese officials removed the requirement for Chinese Catholics to swear independence from Rome and the Pope. So something good was happening here. Okay? And they said as long as they acknowledge that the Pope is only a spiritual leader with no authority over China, then we'll leave you alone. Okay? And then the next year, so this is 1982, and again, these might not seem big to you, but if you were a priest, to be honest, you're like, oh, wow, priests were allowed to say the Pope's name during Mass. That was 1982. Now, before that, Chinese priests testified, we said his name, we just whispered it, right? You know, so we say, we pray for, what is it? I can't say the Eucharistic prayer unless I'm saying it in order. Remember, Lord, your church scattered throughout the world, blah, 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 together with, what's his name? Francis, our Pope, Uncle Earl, our Bishop, right? Well, at that point, they would say together with, and they wouldn't say the Pope's name. They weren't allowed to. But what priests testified is, well, we just whispered it. Okay. They were, anyway, it was ad orientem back then. For those of you who, they were still doing what you and I would call the pre-Vatican II Mass. Why were they doing that? It's not like they got mail. Right? It's not like they knew, there was a thing called Vatican II. Truly, I went to seminary with Catholic priests from China who did not know Vatican II happened. The Mass they were raised with was the one where you faced east and you prayed what we call sub voce, under the voice. Right? So for those of you old enough, you remember the priest, right? I'm going to turn around. This will be visual. Well, I can't do that because of the mic, can I? But where the priest, it was the bus driver Mass, right? The priest looked up to heaven. The priest looked up to heaven, and he said the prayers to God on your behalf. Yeah? And by the way, had a fascinating conversation, right, with a bunch of priests. And we were all talking about, why did we turn and face the people? And I think I've talked to you guys about this. No one knows. It is nowhere in the Vatican II documents. And you may notice more and more priests going to, no, we're going to face east. We're all going to face the same direction together. That, oddly enough, that's more egalitarian than what we do now, right? What we do now is called ad popularum. Popularum, I have trouble saying that, facing the people. But ad orientem means facing the east, or to the east. And when we built Holy Family, you remember this, Care? When we measured out where the altar goes, I said, if they change it back to ad orientem, so our altar is all ready for that. Assuming, because that's what every priest I talked to last week assumed. They're like, oh yeah, in our lifetime, they're going to move us back to ad orientem, which I hope I don't freak you out. I'm a big fan of. It takes so much off the idea. Like you may notice, if you pray Mass with me, I don't look at you. I look up. Right? I'm looking up to heaven because I want it clear and I love you. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking on your behalf to the Lord. Yeah? That we're praying together. It's not me praying at you. Right? And that did trip up these guys from China who I went to seminary with. They were like, why are you facing them? And, I said, because you're stupid. Like that. Okay, I did not say that. But anyway, at this point, right, why were the priests were allowed? Now you can say the Pope's name during Mass. And they weren't like, we were doing it anyway. But okay. So that was 1982. Now we get to 1994. And it takes a hard turn again. The state passed, quote, regulations concerning places of religious worship. What is it? It required all places of worship to register with the government. Okay. Now we jump to 2000. St. John Paul II was Pope, and he canonized 120 martyrs of China, including 87 of whom were Chinese. And the Chinese government blew up. Basically, what they were telling the Pope is, you don't name who the saints and martyrs are. We do. Which you might think, that's stupid. Yes, it is. But it's a totalitarian government. They don't need to justify what they do. They just need to do it. And so when St. John Paul II named all these martyrs, 87 of whom were ethically Chinese, the Chinese government went nuts. Since then, Catholicism, like any religion, was permitted to operate only under the state. All legal worship had to be conducted through state-approved churches. And if you wanted to be a state-approved church, if you were Catholic and wanted to be a state-approved church, you had to agree to be under the authority of, quote, the Catholic Patriotic Association. And the Catholic Patriotic Association did not allow for the primacy of the Pope. The CPA, if you don't mind, we'll call it that, Catholic Patriotic Association, oversaw all practices of the Catholic faith. They espoused politically oriented objectives as well. The chairman of the CPA stated in an interview that the church needed individuals who, quote, love the country and love the religion. Politically, they must respect the Constitution, respect the law, and fervently love the socialist motherland. So this is where it gets to our modern situation. The state in China created its own version of Catholicism and required everybody who's Catholic to be a member of it. How we doing? Does that make sense? Okay. Big shock. Not all the Catholics went along with this. Clergy resisted this development, and they were tortured, thrown in prison for a very long period of time. They were executed. They were, quote, disappeared, is the phrase that the Chinese government took to. Father Cheng was a Jesuit who was executed, tortured to death, right? All clergy were then assigned, quote, extensive increased supervision. Bishops and priests were forced to degrade, what they would do is say, okay, you want to be a priest? All right, well, your job is to clean all the toilets in that bus stop and wear this garment. Like just anything they could to humiliate and degrade them, which again, if you're Catholic, you're like, sweet, right? But Chinese government didn't get that. Foreign missionaries were accused of being foreign agents who were there to make China surrender to the imperialists. It got awful. The Holy See reacted with a lot of letters. Okay, so you've heard the word encyclical, right? The Pope wrote an encyclical. What does that mean? An encyclical is a letter that's meant to be circulated. That's literally what it means, right? Encyclical, to cycle it through the community. So when St. John Paul II wrote an encyclical, he was writing that to everybody. Here, pass it around. And the name just came from the day before copiers and before mass production. Okay. When they write apostolic letters, they're writing something to the bishops. Okay. So they wrote a bunch of these, some to the bishops, some to be circulated. Now, some Catholics who recognize the authority of the Pope chose to worship in secret. Underground Catholic Church began to exist. So you are now in a situation, and this continues until today, where you have the state-approved Catholic Church, which Rome does not accept, and you have the secret underground Roman Church, which the state does not accept. Okay? So when I met these seminarians from China, were they a member of the state-approved church? Absolutely. They'd be dead if they weren't. Were they a member of the underground church? Well, gosh, I have no idea. I would hope not. That's against the law. You with me?
Yes.
Now, during this time, bishops were disappeared. They were in prison. They were harassed. And they were executed. I personally met a bishop who for 20-some years was in a cell. And they took a 2x4. They put his legs together and put a 2x4 between his knees. And then they took a hammer and hit one of his knees so it would break both. Made a big sledgehammer. And then they just left him. And then, as you can imagine, the knee would heal wrong. And they would just come and do it again. So he doesn't know how many times this happened. He figures at least once a year they came in and broke both of his knees. This is what they went through. This is what they're going through. They have no means to resist. They are not an armed population. Only the government is armed. They have no means to use the internet because the government has a complete and total stranglehold over the internet. China has a totally different internet than you. Any Catholic bishop or priest that they discovered and didn't kill, they forced to attend ordinations of bishops by the state church. And they had to swear allegiance to those bishops, who might not even be Christian. Yeah. One that I talked to, priest over there who escaped, talked about how they would once in a while just come and grab you. If you were a priest or were thought to be a member of the underground church, and they would put them in this big warehouse where they made Nike tennis shoes. Yeah, he said that's all we did was make Nikes. And they would put these huge headphones on you so you couldn't hear anything, and they would blast party rhetoric in your ears. And he said you would just do this until you passed out. And they would do that for a while and then just take you outside and cut you loose. He has no idea how long he was in there. He said, but it happened to him about 8 times. They just grab him. He said, I might have been in there a month. I don't know. You lose time. You pass out. You wake up. They feed you, put you back on the line. You go till you pass out. You wake up. They feed you. You go back on the line. And they're just pounding in your head propaganda. And you make Nikes. So next time you see an NBA player wearing Nikes talking to you about injustice, go ahead and punch him in the face. Because they know this. They know this. Everyone knows Nikes are made by slaves. They're made by political slaves. It's unreal. And they still charge you $100 for them. Think about that, right? Because Nike doesn't pay those workers any more than Apple pays those workers. They pay the government for the slaves to make them. Yeah. Catholics in China experience tremendous pressure to break communion with the Vatican. They will be rounded up occasionally and forced to renounce the papacy, the primacy of the Roman pontiff. How are we doing for time? I didn't even look.
Good.
Are people bored?
50
Yeah?
minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things, like, now we're getting a little more talk, right? We're getting a little more word, and we find out some interesting things that, sorry, I made a note somewhere and it just went away. Oh, that there were areas where the governors or whoever's in charge, I'm not sure how that system works, didn't enforce any of these rules, right? And there were places where they enforced them brutally. But either way, in 2014, the local Chinese party officials in several provinces, and then it flowed out from there, required removal of all crosses from any Christian churches, and they completely demolished anyone they could find. The party's explanation was that those churches were considered unruly or unregistered. So what we've got is two more things to cover, okay? One is, what kind of numbers are we talking about, okay? When we talk about a country under a complete totalitarian leadership, it's hard to know what's true. We know there's 1.3 billion Chinese. We know that for 30 years, most pregnancies in China ended in state-mandated abortions, right? We know that. It's a fact. Most pregnancies, right? You were allowed one child. But what we also know is China at some point is experiencing or is going to experience the same thing everyone not in Africa, South America, everyone south of the equator basically isn't going to experience. Everybody north is a population bomb. What does that mean? We're going to run out of people. And you're like, well, that's ridiculous. That's not how it works. It's totally how it works. It's why even now you drive around and you see all these jobs wanted. We can't hire people, right? No one can find anyone to work because there are less humans of working age, right? This is a big deal, you guys. And if you want, again, I think I've recommended this book numerous times, The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which is not a religious book, but it's about the fact that for the first time in human history, we're going backwards on population. And what does that mean? Well, so you look at my mom, right? My mom was number 14 in her family, and they had a farm. Why would you have 14 kids? Free labor. Every one of those kids was valuable. Every one of those kids, now you're going to laugh, but seriously, produced income for their mom and dad, right? They expanded the family. Now, I think, what was it, to have 40 acres? The average human could reasonably farm 40 acres per person, okay? A working adult male, right, could do 40 acres. Well, now you take those 14 kids, and they all had 1 billion kids. But nobody's farming anymore. Why? Our tools got better. Now, like, I go to one of my cousins, and remember that combine we saw 2 years ago? This will blow you away unless you know farming. Like, we haven't been involved in farming in years. I didn't know they could do this. They have a drone, and the drone flies over his thousands of acres that he and one boy are doing. Right? Think about that. It maps out his fields, sends the directions to his seeders, and he says, I don't even really need to drive. I just sit in the chair, and my tractor seeds the fields perfectly because it got instructions from the drone. This is crazy. His combine has a fridge in it, remember? Because he just sits there and reads a book and has a pop. You don't need thousands of people to farm thousands of acres. You need 2. Right? So what's happened, though, is we kind of overdid it in terms of not having kids. Like, I was just writing something, and this might be controversial, right? But a bishop wrote an article about 3 years ago. I should look this up. But he wrote an article about the awful letters people sent him about how come you're closing this church? How come you're canceling these masses? And he just kept saying, we're out of priests. And then here's what he wrote. Ready? Catholics, you contracepted yourself out of the priesthood. He said, you just contracepted yourself out of it. Sorry. You stopped having kids. You have your 1.5 kids, and you don't want that 1.5 kid to be celibate. You want him to have 1.5 kids. Well, great. 2 things happen when you have small family. 1, those kids are naturally more selfish than a big family. It's not a sin on their part. It's just how it is. You don't have to be so aware, right? If there's 2 kids and they each have their own bedroom in a 3,000 square foot house, they don't need to be selfless. We had 12 kids at one point packed into a house. We had to be selfless. We weren't virtuous. We were practical.
We had 1 bathroom.
We had 1 bathroom, 1 shower, right? And I didn't know that was weird because it wasn't back then, right? And again, I'm not saying, but you get me. Well, the same thing's happening in China, but there's 2 problems they have. 1, in a culture where there's no 401k, when you retire, you're dependent on your child. So what did people do if they could only have 1 child and they gave birth to a girl? Well, they killed it. Right? One of the nuns I talked to from China, a Chinese woman, talked about this thing they called picking babies. I think I've talked about this. Where a mom would have a daughter but didn't want to kill her. So she would go leave her outside of a convent. Because what they knew is these sweet, beautiful nuns would come out every night and, quote, pick babies and raise these little girls in their convent. Right? Literally, this nun talked about walking through the rice fields around their convent and picking babies. And they were all girls. So you have a population with a wildly disproportionate male number and a disproportionate female number. Right? So there's all these things. They're called population bombs, and everyone's going to have one. And when they do, it's going to shake our culture to its core. A tiny number of young men and women who are trying to carry the financial weight of the whole population. Is this making sense? China's is going to be worse because it's not natural. They just aborted the heck out of it. Okay? With that in mind, this nun claimed to me that there are more Catholic nuns than anyone would believe in China. Because what happens if you're a little girl, right? And all you know is this group of women saved you when you were a baby and did it because of God. I think you're going to want to know that God. And I think you're going to look at these noble women and go, I want to be like her. As you can imagine, China's not a big fan of young, healthy women vowing celibacy. Yeah. Now you ask the Chinese state government, we don't have any nuns here. You ask the Catholics, and they'll go, yeah, there's some nuns. Okay. It's literally true that when I talk to Chinese seminarians in Detroit, Michigan, they would do this. They would look around before they answered your questions. They were so used to being listened to, and they were scared to say the wrong thing. Think about that. We do that on college campuses. Sorry. You don't want to be accused of wrong things. So what we'll do next show, tomorrow, is we'll try to get a sense of the numbers, but know this, a lot of it is guesswork. In a country of 1.3 or 4 billion, India passed them on population. It's fascinating stuff. And then we're going to look at the incredibly controversial moves Pope Francis has done in response to the situation in China. And when I say incredibly, what was the word? Controversial. Please know I'm not dissing our Holy Father. I think he would tell you what he did is controversial. It's wild. And only time will tell if it was prudent. Short term, it's killing Christians, right? Who knows long term? Because he knows things we don't. So there it is. Okay, so we will tomorrow pick things up from there. We'll look at the numbers as best we can. And then we'll look at all the things that have happened because Pope Francis totally shuffled the deck and redealt. And we got a totally new game. But right now, where we're going to leave it is this. It's pre-Pope Francis, and the church has existed as two realities in China. One, a fake Catholic church run by the state. They appoint their own bishops, they ordain their own priests, and they do nothing without the approval of their premier. Then you have this underground church. This underground church accepts the authority of the Pope and lives in union with Rome. But what they're doing is illegal. So they're often caught, killed, arrested, tortured, imprisoned, whatever. So that's where we'll leave it. Please keep in mind, let's see, this weekend at the noon mass at Holy Family, we're going to do it for my anniversary. And afterward, we'll have from 1 till 3 tacos and hot dogs and maybe some quesadillas. I know, I just threw that out there. I just wanted to say the wrong word, right? Because I said tacos, so I felt obligated to say quesadillas. Do you find that funny? I should have had coffee, you guys.
It's not on the menu.
Your face isn't on the menu. Yes! Take that, Polarski! Okay, now you might be thinking, I can't make it. I get it. Trust me. I told, 2 people wrote me, I'm like, I would see you. No, I won't get to talk to you, and my heart will hurt. So you stay home. Don't feel bad. I don't. I guess that's what I got. I felt like there was something I was supposed to share. Huh? Come, Holy Spirit.
Mass this weekend? Did you already talk about
I think so. The noon mass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the 8 and 10 mass this weekend.
Oh, I'm gonna cough. The 8 and 10. At Holy Family will be rituals that the church calls priestless Sundays. So it will count for your Sunday obligation, but it will look a lot more like a communion service than a mass. Okay? So keep that in mind. Should I get into that whole thing? No? I don't know. I had to write an angry bulletin article.
We'll save that for the readers.
Okay. Just basically, if you're listening and you go to Holy Family and you don't like the fact that we're having a communion service, I'm sorry, but it's just life now. Yeah, and it's only going to happen a couple times this year. There's just no priests left, guys. I'm serious. There are more parishes than priests. And the world we grew up in where, just call another priest, which is my favorite line, right? No, we didn't think of that. It's not going to work. We tried. We tried really, really hard, okay? So, with that, salad pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Jesus, thank you for Catholics and Christians whose names we don't know, but will know in heaven. They choose you over comfort, over freedom, and sometimes even over the right to exist. And we are astounded to be a part of that family. We cannot believe we get to call these people our brothers and sisters. Forgive us for the times we complained about silly things. Forgive us. And today, Lord, wherever our Catholic or Christian brothers and sisters in China are, please comfort them, strengthen them, and give them hope. Father, you know the people in our hearts that we love so much and worry about, and you know all the circumstances that we fret about. And we give it all to you, Lord, because we love you so much and we trust you. And may Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. My Kung Fu is strong, which actually kind of makes sense this week because Kung Fu did come from China. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you guys tomorrow. And until then, peas are my gift to you. Is it over?
Oh, it's never over.